Hi, this is Bryant, and I want to do this video for you in full. I want to do it full. I don't want to do a speed drawing. I want to show you how you can digitally paint the sky and the ground. So basically what I've done here is I have created my document 1000 pixels by 600 pixels. And that gives me plenty of space to be able to actually see the document. And on the sky, on the sky and the ground, I'm actually going to use the airbrush. So basically what you do is you would just go up to where you use your regular brush, and then you would just click the little brush icon up at the upper left corner and just click the airbrush option. And when you're drawing or painting in Photoshop and you're painting your sky, and the same is going to go for the ground, you want to start with a darker color at the top. And as you can see here, I'm just kind of skipping around, leaving a little bit of white space, and by doing that it's going to simulate some cloud coverage. But you always want to start with a darker color at the very top of your painting, and then as you go down to your painting at the bottom of your sky, you want to choose a lighter color each time. That way when you're at the very end of your plane of your sky there, you want to have the lightest color possible. So it's always really good to choose or decide how much of the area of the canvas you want to use for your sky. And it makes it more realistic as you begin to do that. So that's one point that I'm going to show you here. Start with a darker color at the top, because the bottom of your plane is going to be towards your ground. So you want to choose a lighter color as you go down toward the ground. And as you can see here, I've got just a little bit of a lighter color here of blue. And when I get enough of coverage here, then I'm going to choose an even lighter color. And you may want to change colors 3 to 4 times, depending on how you want your sky to look. But it's really important to always go a lighter color as you go down toward the ground there and toward the end of your skyline. And you want to use layers as well. I'm using just the regular background layer right now for the sky. But then as I start creating my ground, I'm going to actually put it on a separate layer. So as you see here, I've used about 3 to 4 different shades of blue, and that really gives it a more realistic look when you do that. You can actually go in and you can actually paint in your clouds if you want to, but I've just done it this way just to leave a little bit of white space. So I'm going to create a new layer now, and I'm going to use this for my ground. So I'm basically just going to call it a ground. You can name it whatever you want to name the layers. And I begin to take, and I'm going to choose I don't know, kind of a medium type green here, if you will. And the only difference here is when you start doing your ground, wherever your skyline is there, wherever your plane is, you want to make that light the lightest color. And then as you go toward the bottom of your canvas, you want to get it darker. So it's kind of reversed from the sky and the ground. You want to start at the top with the darkest color on the sky, and you want to start with the lightest color at the skyline or at your plane of your ground, and then you want to get darker as you move down. And the same goes with the ground as it did with the sky. You may choose 3 or 4 different shades of your ground color, but start with the lightest and go to the darkest on the ground. You can use just a regular brush, but I find that the airbrush is really better for drawing landscapes. It just gives it a better texture, and I like the texture that the airbrush gives. So it's really nice. And then I'm choosing a darker color green here. And you'll find the coverage gets a little bit better. You know, sometimes I might get a little bit of a lag in my pen tool here using the screen recorder as I record this. You can always make your brush a little bit bigger as well. I don't like making my brush too big because I always change these colors, go from lighter to darks, and I don't want to cover too much of either light or dark. Now, as I begin to finish my dark color here, after I get done, I'm going to take my smudge tool and I'm going to smudge it a little bit here in just a few minutes, but you don't really have to smudge it. The main thing that you want to use the Gaussian blur tool. You want to actually use the Gaussian blur because that's really good for your ground coverage after you lay down your colors. The Gaussian blur is kind of going to blend it a little bit anyway. But I do like taking a smudge tool occasionally and using it between the light colors and the dark colors, but you really don't have to do that. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the Gaussian blur, and don't want to go up too high, because if you go up too high, then it's really going to make it look ugly. It's going to look terrible. You don't want to go too low either. You just kind of want to go somewhere in between. See, if I go too high like that, it just makes it look bad. Usually about a 0.9 or a 0.10 pixels is just about right. And this is where I'll take the smudge tool a little bit and use it and smudge it just a little bit. I mean, you really don't have to do that. Sometimes it works out really good and sometimes it's really not necessary. One thing that the smudge tool does, see how it puts a little bit of a line there? It's kind of smudging my lights and darks. As I go straight across, it's actually putting some different textures down on the ground. It's just blending my lights with my darks. And one thing you want to do to actually define your ground, you want to go to at a perspective angle, kind of like this. See how I'm just going at an angle, not going straight across, but I'm just kind of going at a diagonal angle here. That kind of lays out the perspective of your ground, because you really don't want your ground just going straight across. It doesn't really look that good when you try to just go straight across with it. But then I do another Gaussian blur as I lay down my plane here. And I just took the smudge tool and made my little lines on my plane like I've just done. It's always important to just create different layers. That way you don't have to go back and you don't ruin the work you've already done. You can just simply delete the layers you don't really want or you're not happy with. So now I'm going to take a little bit of a brown, and I'm just going to kind of lightly just airbrush a little bit of that brown here on the ground, just to give a little bit of a color to it. And then I'm going to take a little bit of some yellows. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow there. Just kind of mix up some colors a little bit. Right now at this point it just looks like a little mess, but it'll all work out. Then maybe take a little bit of orange. It's always good to just add yellow, brown, and orange. Those are really good safe colors for your ground if you're drawing fields like this. And then after we get these colors laid down here, then all we have to do is, well, let me go ahead and name this layer here. I guess I'll just call it tints, because this is just what I'm doing, is kind of tinting the ground a little bit with it. But then after you get all your colors laid down and you tint your ground, you can take your smudge tool again and just kind of smudge those colors together. Just kind of blend them just a little bit. I always recommend at this stage to just go ahead and just blend, because you're using three colors here, the brown, yellow, and orange. Excuse me. I do recommend taking the smudge tool and just smudging those. And then you can go back and use the Gaussian blur again. Use the Gaussian blur a lot. It's really helpful. It's really useful when you're painting in Photoshop. And as you see here, I just kind of blur my tints just a little bit, and it brings my planes, my lines that I've created my planes with out. It keeps those in perspective. And then I'm going to create one more layer here, and going to use this layer for my grass. And when I'm using my grass, I like using a sponge tool. So I've got these custom sponge tools, brush tools that I have. I actually got them free offline. I think it's called Breezy Brush or something to that effect. You can just Google custom sponge brushes, and then you can find them. They're free, and they're really good for grass. And since this is actually just going to be a field, so I'm going to make a lot of, got a little lagging with my recording here. My brush was actually too big, it covered my whole page. I don't want that for sure. But there's a couple of these sponge brushes that is good to use. And whenever you're creating your grass, it's always good to just create a couple of different shades of your grass that you want to make it. Most of the time I'll use a green. Sometimes I'll use a light green, maybe a dark green, and then I may use a little bit of a yellow tint as well. Have to excuse my dog there. My dogs love sitting in the window. But really, I'm not really sure. This brush here is really making my grass a little bit too wide. I'm just going to take and use my smudge tool, and I'm going to smudge it here for a few minutes and just see what I can get out of this. What I'm doing here is just trying to make those patches of grass. And this is what I was talking about. This why you would want to create several layers, because as you create different layers, and you put your grass on a layer, your sky on a layer, and if you're going to do trees, you'll do those on a separate layer, because if it doesn't work out right and you don't like the results you're getting, then you don't have to worry about messing up your whole entire work that you've already done. You can just simply delete that layer that you don't really like. And I have a feeling I'm going to be deleting this layer because this is really not the look that I want to get in this field here. Not really liking the texture of this sponge brush here. Even if I lower my brush size a little bit, don't really think it's going to give me what I want. But that's the thing about painting in Photoshop and creating layers. Try one thing. If it doesn't work, if you don't get the results you're expecting, then you can delete that layer and then just start all over. So I'm going to delete this layer. So that way I preserve the rest of my work that I've already done. And that's the great thing about using layers. So I'm just creating me another layer, and I'm going to choose one of these other brushes. This is another sponge brush here. Now when you're laying down your field grass, like I'm doing here, you want to start from the very back of your field where the plane is between the field and the sky. You want to create real small patterns with these textures here with this sponge brush. Or if you're just using a regular brush and you're just going to give it some small strokes for just regular blades of grass, then that's what you want to do as well. You want to make the back of the field by the sky or by your plane. You want to make that small, and then as you come closer to the front of the field, then you want to make your grass larger. And that's always something good to keep in mind there, and to make your field really look like it's got that depth to it, that perspective to it. Because you want to get it as realistic looking as you can. And I'm just going to keep laying down these smaller patterns of the sponge here. And now I'm going to increase my brush size as I get a little bit closer. We'll make the patches of grass here, I want to make those a little bit larger. And if you'll notice too, the perspective lines that I created with my smudge tool, as I'm laying down my grass here, I'm kind of going in that line of that perspective line that I created. And then as you get closer, you want to make the grass a little bit bigger, so you want to increase the size of your brush a little more. And now I'm just going to take a little bit of some yellow tints here. Just kind of mix it up a little bit. I like greens and yellows in the field. And as you can see, the tints that I have just smeared around earlier, you can see how it kind of gives the ground a little bit of character to it. And this is basically, I mean, it's simple. This is basically the concept of taking and just creating the ground. You know, this is a good way to create your sky and a simple way to create your ground. And when you're creating your ground, you'll want to use the perspective planes like I have just done earlier when I created the ground here. You always want to put a little bit of color on your ground like I did with the tints. This way it'll give it a little bit of character, and the only difference would be is what you want to do with the grass. If you want to make some clumps of grass like I've done here to simulate that it's a field, then you can do that. And if you're just creating blades of grass, I mean, you can do that as well. There's just all sorts of different ways you can go about creating grass. And then as you get your grass laid down, then guess what it's time to do again? It's time to use the blur tool or the blur filter. And we'll go up and go to filter, blur, and then choose Gaussian blur. And again, you want to be careful not to blur it out too much. You just want to blur it just a little bit. And then as you blur it the way you want to blur it, and that's it. That's about all you do. And this is a simple way to create your sky and to create your ground and the perspective of your ground. Stay tuned for more tutorials on stuff to draw.